All right, welcome back to FYI, the For Your Institution podcast presented by Mongoose. I'm your host, Gil Rogers, and today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Ann Lyn Hall, CEO of Prosperity Works. Today, we are going to be talking about a wide variety of topics, mainly focused on some key themes around economic mobility as it relates to higher education outcomes, as well as some really insightful work that Dr. Hall has done with respect to text message nudges and the predictability that it has around student retention and persistence. So Ann Lyn, it is great to connect with you. Welcome to the podcast. Before we dive in, I would love for you to just give a little brief introduction, share your story, how you got to Prosperity Works, what Prosperity Works is, and we will then take it from there. So I'll kick it to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm super excited to be able to talk with you all. Again, my name is Ann Lyn Hall. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have been in higher ed for over 19 years and worked at a really large community college in New Mexico. In most years, that college is larger than four-year institutions in the state. And I am a proud mama of a 6-year-old and took a leap, maybe a leap of faith, whenever I left the community college after I got my doctorate, to run a small nonprofit that does statewide work here in New Mexico called Prosperity Works. And our mission really is around economic prosperity for all New Mexicans. And one of the ways that we really do that work is we see higher ed and a higher ed degree as a form of an asset for families, and that families can use that asset to really propel their families forward.
That's an amazing philosophy and a great way to look at it, and I think a great way to start this conversation. And I think back to when I graduated from college. My grandmother, I lived in Colorado at the time. My grandmother told me that, when you graduate, it's not just about the GPA that's on the transcript, but it's that piece of paper symbolizes and shows people that you finish what you start. And there's a lot that goes into all of that. I would love to just kind of understand your thoughtful, your approach and Prosperity Works' approach, and some of the things that you do to help students to understand that and help them to get connected to the right resources to be successful in school and when they've completed school.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always think about related to a degree, and you use that example, Gil, of that piece of paper, like a degree is something no one can ever take away from you, right? Like it's something that you earn, and you have it throughout your whole life. At Prosperity Works, we support individuals in getting their degrees through a matched savings account, where when a student can save, they can save up to $1,000. We match it with $4,000, and they can use that money, a total of $5,000, to get that degree. They can use it to spend for books or tuition or a computer, whatever they need to really be successful in college. And we know that finances are a big barrier, especially for low-income students, and being able to access higher ed and to really be able to complete a degree. And so we see that as a way, again, a financial way to support people to get the asset of higher ed. We also know through the research that when someone gets a degree, they're more likely to make money and their household income goes up. And that we see as families get degree, as parents get degree, that their children sort of naturally follow in those footsteps because there's an example of someone in their family who'd gotten a degree before. So, and that there's this really amazing college knowledge that comes from having someone in your family who's gone to college before. So you show up at school, someone gives you the runaround, and you don't know what the right answer is to a question that you really need. If you've got somebody in your family who's gone to college before, then that person says, hey, don't stop there. You need to go back and ask that question again until you get the answer that you need.
Yeah, I've been a part of a number of research studies over the year and at companies I've worked with around these exact topics, right? And the challenges, particularly of first generation students and, not necessarily having feeling like they have an advocate on campus, even though they might. It's that perception that they don't, that then leads them to feel like they don't. And then it becomes a vicious cycle, right? And it's a chicken and egg problem at that point. And so I think that there's so much that needs to be done for financial literacy, for helping to students just understand what resources are available to them to help with, academic engagement, help them with the tutoring services. These are all the things that, and to kind of transition into the work of your dissertation, and we talked via email a little bit about this. In a past life, I worked for a company that had a lot of their work based on research by Dr. Vincent Tinto. And those who are listening or not familiar, renowned author and thinker and influencer in the student affairs and student persistence and retention space, right? And we know that there are key drivers that are impacting a student's ability and desire to retain and persist at an institution, and it boils down to a number of key things. Academic engagement, financial insecurity are two of the top ones. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about your dissertation and your work. And I know that the audience for FYI, many of whom are connected with Mongoose, are very interested in text message engagement. And I know that was a core component of your research. So I'd love for you to share some high level of your findings and your work. And then I'm sure I'll have 1,000,001 questions to ask you during that process.
For sure, for sure. Well, I've always been interested in behavior change. How do we help individuals do the thing that they really want to do in the easiest possible way? So for a long time, I got at that through coaching in higher ed and helping to create a relationship between a student and someone at the college, which is definitely connected to Vincent Tinto's work related to student engagement. And as things progressed, I was trying to figure out, as a college administrator, what are the ways that we help create that engagement and create that relationship, and create the behavior change that's perhaps more cost effective than a person as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so what led me to that was really text messages and text nudges, because even in this podcast, I've gotten several text messages during this call, and I've been able to read them, and none of them were things that I needed to respond to, but they got my immediate attention. I have no idea how many emails I've gotten while we've been talking, and I'll read them whenever I have time. And so as a researcher, I was interested in whether or not text nudges, meaning something that can push someone to do something, impacted retention. And I studied at community college. I was able to get a pretty big swath of data. So I was able to look at about 300,000 text nudges that this college had sent out to about 20,000 students over the course of an academic year. And I was interested in retention, because retention, you have to be retained before you can get a degree. And so I believe that the degree is that asset that you get long term. You need that retention. And the primary focus of the text nudges at the institution that I studied really was around re-enrollment and staying engaged in the college process.
Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence Chat helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. Your website visitors can't find answers quickly, so they leave. We leverage proactive outreach and anticipate common roadblocks, knowing the most significant decisions often start with the smallest conversations. Our powerful AI ensures instant support and is smart enough to know exactly when to hand off to a staff member. If nobody is available, it allows for easy follow-up. Learn more at mongooseresearch.com.
And so I was interested in the predictive quality, meaning like, could you predict whether or not someone was retained or not by whether or not they got text nudges? And so there are two things I want to tell you about the research. One is that sometimes when you start research, you don't find what you were expecting to find, which is sometimes disappointing or sometimes fabulous. In this study, the institution that was doing the text nudges had a pretty refined way of sending text nudges. They only sent text nudges to students who weren't enrolled. So if you were already enrolled, you didn't get as many text nudges because what the nudges were to get you re-enrolled. And so the students who got nudges were students who weren't enrolled. And so in the research, there was a negative relationship between getting a text nudge and being retained because of the way that they were doing the text nudges.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that text nudges don't support retention. It just means that the way I did the research, that's not what I found.
Got it. And I think that that's just to chime in on that piece. I think that's why it's important for institutions to actually think about doing these things earlier and more often, right? I feel like one of the things, and you see there are a number of different providers in the space that do predictive models for students when they're enrolling at the institution, and they're using a regression analysis of historical enrollment data, or they're doing proactive outreach to students via email and text message throughout the year. Those are the institutions I feel that are seeing better results when they have that kind of 1-2 punch of identifying the students who are at risk based off of their based off of specific criteria, but then also being more proactive in their approach to outreach versus waiting until they're the students who haven't registered and trying to reach out to them. By that point, it's almost too late. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to do the research again, I would ask a different research question. Does the text nudge get the thing to happen that you're nudging about? That would be the question I would look at, because nudges are pretty quick, right? And people take action pretty quickly from that nudge. So I would have used a smaller time frame between the nudge and the thing that was being predicted, and I think I would have different results than what I had. I did look at the data differently and looked at correlational data, and correlation doesn't mean that one thing caused another. It just means that there was a relationship between the two things. And what I found was that students who got more nudges were more likely to be retained. So students who got between 16 and 32 nudges, there was one student that got 32 nudges in this study, were 76% likely to be retained. Compared to students who got 0 nudges, which was 70% retention rate. So there was a connection between nudges and retention. I just couldn't predict it in the way I was doing that particular model. So still cool things related to helping remind students, especially first generation students that might not know all the steps that they need to take. And to be quite honest, there are an awful lot of steps you got to take to get through enrollment process higher ed, and it's pretty easy to forget one of them, and some of them are pretty detrimental. So if you are attending a college that drops you if you don't pay and you don't know you need to pay, then you're going to get dropped from all the classes that you spent a lot of time getting registered for. So I still think that nudges have a really important place within higher education. I do think it's important to figure out what is the right place for those nudges so that they really impact the thing that you want to have them impact in your institution.
Certainly. And I think that if anyone wanted to try to say that text messaging in general is not an effective way to reach students, they would be insane, right? I think there's just no amount of research is needed to help us to look around campus and see students looking down at their phones and engaging with people via text message. And so I feel like it's more around the cadence of the messaging and the content of the messaging and the timing of the messaging, not should you be messaging. It's not a debate, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I still see higher education institution using email as sort of the primary form of communication with students. But I do see as students, as younger students are coming through, they're just not reading their email, and that text messages really are a way to reach students. So I don't think people should not be texting students. I do think there's ways for us to build relationships. So if we go back to Vincent Tinto and think about ways that we create connection with students via text message, how do we personalize those text messages? How do we have those text messages come from someone that's meaningful at the institution, so they're getting messages from the same person that they do have a relationship with? I think there's some really great things that institutions could do that are best practices related to those text messages.
Right. I think it boils down to it's the tale as old as time with marketing and communication. It's about the right time with the right message via the right channel from the right sender. And that's a lot of rights to get right. But that's an important component to this. And it's things that we talk about all the time. Personalize the content. Dear first name is not the only way to personalize it. It's following up on a message based on a response. It's following up with it. Even little things like you mentioned email. If something has to be done via email, nothing says you can't shoot a text message saying, hey, check your email. There is an important thing in there, right? And those are the types of ways that counts as a nudge, right? I think that would count. So these are all ways to leverage these communication channels together. I think one of the things in higher education we do pretty well is actually is bring in new ways of communicating. We never get rid of ways to communicate. We just continue to layer on, and text messaging is just another layer for engaging with students. And what we need to do is be more thoughtful about, like I said, the cadence of the communication, the timing of the communication, and the content of those communications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think is sending a text message to someone to check their email a nudge? Absolutely. You're nudging them to go find a particular email that really is important to the institution. And I think that it's hard for students to really kind of go through all of the different communications from an institution of higher ed and to know which ones really matter. And so if you send them a text nudge to say, this one really matters, you need to go pay attention to it, that helps students sort of filter through the communications that are coming from an institution.
Awesome. So if you had one recommendation for that, if people fast forwarded to this timestamp in the episode and they're like, okay, I want my one key finding, my one nugget to bring back to my boss from this week's episode of FYI, what's your key recommendation for institutions when they're thinking about incorporating text message nudges into their strategies for specifically student retention and persistence?
Well, I guess the one key nugget is that there is a relationship between text nudges and retention, and that they really do matter, that we're communicating with students regularly with words that they really do understand and not academic jargon, words that they really can get, and that we're really telling students what the most important things are for them to know to be successful in college. So I guess my message is yes. Please, if you're not texting yes yet, you absolutely should be texting your students. And if you are already texting your students, then just really assessing to make sure that the communication is meeting students' needs.
Absolutely. And as a shameless plug, the people who power this podcast, Mongoose, can absolutely help you with a platform to be able to effectively implement a text message strategy that's measurable, trackable for your students. So definitely check out the Mongoose team and connect with them as well. So Ann Lyn, it has been a pleasure connecting with you, and I feel that your content is going to really help our audience a lot when it comes to strategically thinking about how to use text messaging and specifically text nudges for retention. How can people stay in touch with you, connect with you online? What are the best ways to find you and stay in touch?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for asking, Gil. You can find out more about Prosperity Works at our website. Our website is www.prosperityworks.net. And I'd love to connect with people. My email address is the best way to get a hold of me. My email address is Ann Lyn, ANNLYN @prosperityworks.net. And if you send me an email and you want to send me a text nudge, I'll send you my phone number so that you can send me a text nudge to make sure that we stay connected.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ann Lyn. We appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us. We will see you next time on FYI.